What is going on, fantasy owners? It is the 2013 kickoff edition. The first week is in the books for the Fantasy Football Stock Report. Um, my team got a win this week. Big win this week. Got a good week from a lot of different guys. Hopefully you guys came through for your teams as well. We're here to break it all down for you guys. We're breaking down. I know in the past I've tried some different formats, but I'm kind of going back to the format that worked well for me with my podcast the first time I did it on the show on Blog Talk Radio. I'm going to have it where basically I'm going to go game by game and break down two or three guys that really broke out, did really, really well, and then, of course, three guys that, got my term, the hair pullers, the guys that let us down, fell short, didn't exactly meet up to our expectations, or really struggled, and we'll talk about their matchups going forward in the coming week for this coming week's week 2. So a lot to get to, a lot to talk about, a lot to break down. Let's get right into it. Starting with the Thursday night game, this game was really hyped for a lot of different reasons. Obviously, there's a lot of pregame hype for this. Baltimore, they're the defending champs, but they have to go on the road. They have to play at Denver in Peyton Manning's house because the scheduling issue with the Baltimore Orioles. So they had to play in Denver. There's a big issue, flack, pun intended, over the big Joe Flacco banners hanging all around downtown Denver. So that was definitely a big thing for the Denver faithful. Well, certainly they took that frustration out on the Ravens, and Peyton Manning is at the top of our 3 stars list. He simply dominated in every aspect. He was definitely looking like he hadn't left off anything from his performance last year. The Broncos simply rolled the Ravens 49-27. Absolutely dominant performance, certainly for Manning himself. Only the 6th quarterback in NFL history with 7 touchdown passes. That is absolutely outstanding. He found 2 to his new tight end, who we'll also talk about, 2 to Demaryius Thomas, 2 to Wes Welker, and I think 1 to one of the running backs, I'm not sure on that. But yeah, simply just an outstanding performance. So if you had Manning on your team this week, you pretty much likely won your fantasy matchup. In a CBS league, Manning had 60 fantasy points by himself. So even if the rest of your team didn't do much for you, with Manning alone, if you were going up against a bad team, or the rest of you guys maybe had 10-point weeks, 12 weeks, Manning alone probably helped you win your week. So now this likely won't happen obviously every single week, but certainly it's a good start for Manning and his fantasy owners themselves. But it only cements the fact that further you should really start Manning with confidence, usually regardless of matchup. You can't really sit Peyton Manning, not certainly after this. This goes the same for his receivers. Demaryius Thomas, Wes Welker, these guys are probably going to start every single week, barring injury. They're usually pretty healthy guys, except for Welker. He's had his share of issues, but as long as they're healthy, you're starting these guys. And you're starting probably a guy that probably isn't available on the waiver wire in a lot of leagues. Tight end Julius Thomas. This guy broke out for an outstanding game. I hadn't even heard of this guy until I watched this game. Who's Julius Thomas? Who is this guy? I'd never even heard of him. I knew their other tight ends. I knew Jacob Tamme and Joel Dreesen, but I never heard of this guy. But he completely broke out. 5 catches, 110 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Thomas looks to be the better option at the tight ends going forward, because that Tamme and Dreesen, they only really got a whole lot of work when it came to the red zone. They really didn't get a whole lot of other throws, but certainly Thomas has that. He's going to be probably the top waiver pick of the week. I think he had the most points of any free agent available out there. So at least in my league. So. Well, except for the Chiefs' defense, which, they're playing Jacksonville, so can't buy that with a grain of salt. But Thomas, definitely someone, if you're not confident on your tight end, or if you're looking for a solid number 2, backup tight end option for you, Thomas is definitely a guy you can grab off the waiver wire. I think he is a solid number 1, number 2 option going forward from here on out. Speaking of tight ends, the other tight end in Baltimore didn't have himself a very bad week either. Our third start in that game is Dallas Clark. With Jacoby Jones getting hurt in that game, he took a shot to his teammate. He has a knee injury. We don't know the extent of it yet, but he might miss some time. So again, the receiving core in Baltimore is already paper thin. It's Torrey Smith, and pretty much that's it. There's really no other weapons for Flacco to throw to. They did bring Tandon Doss back, but I don't know what his role is going to be. Of course, Pitta is out, and Ed Dixon clearly was invisible in this game. He really, Clark had 7 catches for 87 yards in this game. So that's going to be a huge thing going forward for the Ravens. If he is the one that gets more involved, and if Flacco prefers him as his target, then I think you can maybe consider Clark a number 2 tight end for a decent option. Not maybe a recommended starter every week, but certainly a guy you can maybe possibly plug in as a second option for you if you start 2 tight ends in your league, or just a guy you can stash on your bench, see what he does the rest of the year. Clark's a guy you can look at. As for the guys who didn't do so well in this game, what else can I say about the Denver running back situation? It is clearly a committee, but at the same time, it is also clearly a mess. And then with Manning going off like that, the Broncos just completely abandoned the running game. But again, the Ravens' D has been known to be strong against the run. So really, you weren't expecting a whole lot out of these guys, out of Ronnie Hillman, Monty Ball, Shone Moreno. You weren't expecting a whole lot of things out of these guys, the so-called 3 horsemen, if you will. Or I call them that anyway. But right now, they're not exactly mighty stallions right now on the running game. Moreno led the way. He had 9 carries for 28 yards. Ball had 8 for 24. And Hillman only had 4 for 15. So if any of these guys are worth dropping, it's probably Hillman because, again, he didn't get the bulk of the work. I am concerned about Ball because I did draft him in the 4th round of my draft to be my number 2 guy. But clearly, this situation in Denver has not played itself out yet. I might give him 1 more week, stash him, see what happens, see if this plays out the way that people are expecting it to be. But it's definitely a situation worth monitoring. I wouldn't certainly start any Denver running back unless the matchup is really, really juicy. And I don't think next week's is any exception to that. Denver plays the Giants, but the Giants mostly got more carved up in the passing game than the running game. So I would say I still wouldn't trust anybody yet until the situation plays itself out. Ray Rice of Baltimore, normally a guy you can count on, but the Ravens were trailing most of the night, so Rice was kind of left with a short straw in the second half. They had to throw to kind of try and keep up from behind. The touchdown really is the only thing that saved Rice's fantasy day. He only had 36 yards rushing and 35 yards receiving. So, yes, that's 12 points, but again, without the touchdown, Rice definitely would have had a rough go of it. But the nice thing about Rice owners is no need to panic, I think, in the situation. He has a nice matchup this week with Cleveland in Week 2. I think he should bounce back very well. I think you can consider Rice as you normally would among your fantasy running back options. And then Eric Decker of Denver. It's the rule of averages. With so many, Peyton Manning has so many weapons to feed in Denver. To both either the Thomases, to Welker, then to Decker. Maybe to Tammy Andreessen or his running backs like Hillman or Moreno. There's so many mouths to feed in Denver. One guy's going to get the short stick. Well, it looks right now, certainly, that Decker's going to get that short stick. He only had 2 catches for 32 yards. So now it might depend on the week. It might depend which guy. Maybe Thomas will have maybe Demarius Thomas will have a bad week next week, or Julius Thomas, or whoever. But for now, considering what we have just seen from Week 1, I think Decker, more of a borderline number 3 for the Giants matchup. Obviously, you're starting Demarius, you're starting Welker, you're starting Julius Thomas if you have a weak tight end. But Decker, I see him more as a borderline, maybe number 3 guy for the matchup. You can certainly start him. But again, just based on last week, kind of temper your expectations a little bit based on that matchup. Okay, on to the next game. How about Tennessee? How about the Titans? beating Pittsburgh. I mean, I don't think anybody kind of expected this. It was kind of an ugly game. 16-9 was the final. Pittsburgh really struggled for most of the day. They were stuck on 2 points for a long time and really didn't get anything going. But I don't know if this just shows that Tennessee is an improved team on the rise. You know, their offensive line is better. You know, the offense is still kind of a question mark, but maybe this shows that their defense has improved. So, or Pittsburgh is that bad. Without Bell at running back, the running back situation is a mess. They just lost LaRod Stevens-Howling for the year with a torn ACL, so he's out of the mix. They just re-signed Jonathan Dwyer, who they cut. So, just a lot of question marks on both sides for these teams. But let's highlight the good and the bad. For the good, the 3 stars, Antonio Brown of Pittsburgh. This guy, in the past, because he was behind Mike Wallace, he was a very frustrating number 2, number 3 option. But now he has clearly cemented his status as Pittsburgh's number 1 wideout option. Because Mike Wallace is gone, he's crying his tears out in Miami because he's frustrated that he's not getting the ball enough. But Brown, no issues for him. Caught 7 passes for 71 yards. Now, even though he wasn't the most targeted receiver in that game, that was Emmanuel Sanders, who had 12 targets, but he only 57 yards. So Brown made the most of his opportunities. He did more with less. So that's a huge thing for Antonio Brown going forward. I like Brown as a solid number 2 option for the Cincinnati matchup this coming week. I think Brown definitely is as a guy. You know, Ben's got to throw the ball to somebody, and while he does have some other weapons in there like Sanders and some of the other guys, excuse me, I think Brown's going to be his most consistent producer. So I like Brown as a number 2 this week. Nate Washington of Tennessee. He was the most targeted Titans receiver, and Jake Locker has to throw the ball to somebody. Again, not a whole lot of great receiving core talent in Tennessee. We've known that over the years. There's really no one that has emerged as a number 1 wide receiver option. We thought it was going to be Kenny Britt. Then he got hurt, and then he had off-the-field issues. We think it's going to be Kendall Wright or Damian Williams or whoever. But no one really has cemented themselves. But he did catch 4 passes for 46 yards. He was targeted 7 times. You know, if you're desperate, maybe you use Washington as a sneaky number 3 against the Texans this week. You just saw last night, San Diego's offense was able to move the ball at will on the Texans, at least early going. So maybe it's just a sign that the Texans secondary is still vulnerable. The Texans didn't have Ed Reed in that game. His status is still unknown for the future. So, so a lot to see there. But maybe, again, a sneaky number 3 matchup if you're desperate. You don't have any other better option wide receiver. Maybe you plug a Nate Washington in there just to see what happens against that Texan secondary if Ed Reed doesn't play. Excuse me. All right, and finally, the last star. I mean, who else? Chris Johnson of Tennessee. Now we've all heard that the offensive line is so much better in Tennessee. It's revamped. They did things to the draft and free agency, and that's nice. And I'm sure Chris Johnson was happy about that. But again, he only put out 70 yards on 25 carries. Yes, but after his recent seasons where he did not much of anything, I think fantasy owners will gladly take 7 points from him. That's number 2 running back. That's probably what he is right now. So, and because they're playing Houston next week, the Houston D is strong. Ryan Matthews, the Chargers, didn't do a whole lot against them. They were more beat by the pass. So I would treat Chris Johnson as more of a number 2 option again for that Houston matchup. That's kind of what he is right now. He's not a lead anymore. He's just more of a number 2 decent running back. As for the bad, the guys made us pull it our hair. Like I said, the Pittsburgh running backs, I mean, this situation just gone from bad to worse. Stevens-Howling, tears ACL, done for the year. So Isaac Redmond now pretty much is the only healthy running back until Le'Veon Bell comes back from that foot injury. But now they're bringing back Jonathan Dwyer. But even though, you have Redmond and Dwyer, neither of these guys are really recommended starting options for you. Bell is the only Pittsburgh running back worth even taking a look at once he comes back from his injury. But because these guys have just not proven that they can carry a full load and be consistent for a whole game. So this situation really needs to be avoided at all costs if you can. I wouldn't touch it. No. Don't touch it. Don't touch this. And don't touch that dial either. But yeah, I wouldn't touch it. I don't like either of these guys, Redmond or Dwyer. This week, who they play? Pittsburgh, Cincinnati. Well, Cincinnati,
is kind of tough on D, kind of not. So, but still, not great for these guys. Don't like it. Jake Locker of Tennessee is probably going to be on this list every single week. Again, if you're relying on Jake Locker as a quarterback, you have a really crappy team. I mean, really, 11 of 20 for 125 yards. I mean, definitely not a recommended starter against this Texas defense. But, definitely not starting him. But maybe, if you're in a deep league where you start like 3 quarterbacks, maybe you look at him as a number 3 guy because the Titans might have to throw a lot in this game. Might be behind a lot in this game against Houston. So, again, kind of like Nate Washington, kind of the same situation. You're probably looking at him as a desperate number 3 option. And Kenny Britt. Poor Kenny Britt. I mean, his fall, has just been so outstanding. I mean, not outstanding, but, just outstanding the fact that, excuse me, but certainly disappointing. He was only targeted twice in the game, had 1 catch for 15 yards. So much I was always expected of him, and he always seems to disappoint us. So again, you might want to rate him a sneaky number 3 against the Texans, but then again, you never know who's going to catch the passes in Tennessee. It could change from week to week, so more risky than not. So just be aware and temper expectations on anybody in the Titans offense. All right, moving on to our next matchup. Boy, I don't think anybody also expected this to be a close, interesting game. How about New England and Buffalo? And the Bills had the Pats on the ropes for most of this game. They were leading 21-20 late. Looked like they were going to pull off the upset, but in the end, New England, Tom Brady, one of those clutch quarterbacks in the league, puts his team in position to win the game, and they get a field goal out late, and the Patriots pulled out the win, 23-21. Breakout guys from this first week. Of course, now some of these guys, I put this all together and kind of looked at these stats, of course, before the recent news came out regarding a couple of guys, so I'll tell you on that here in a minute. But Shane Vereen, the job that he was able to do this first week with the Patriots, oh my gosh. The breakout story, it looked like it was going to begin. Ridley fumbled away his chance, got in Bill Belichick's doghouse. He's had fumbling issues before, and Vereen put up 159 total yards. He was the only running back in week 1 to top 100 yards rushing. That is saying something right there about the potential of Shane Vereen. He didn't find the end zone that game, unfortunately, but still, 15 fantasy points, nothing to sneeze at. Now, in all likelihood, he definitely would have been a must-start against the Jets on Thursday Night Football. But then we heard the news shortly after the game that Vereen broke a bone in his wrist. Now, it's not a big break from what we've been hearing from the fantasy websites. It's just a small break in his bone, but it is going to require surgery and is going to keep him out a few weeks. So there have been conflicting reports on how long Vereen will be out. Some are saying 2 to 3 weeks. Some are saying as high as 4 weeks. So certainly this is a very concerning situation for Vereen's owners, myself included. I have a lot of Patriots on my team, so this is definitely concerning for me going forward. So obviously if you have Vereen, you're going to want to bench him as long as he's out. He's not going to do anything for your team while he's going through this wrist procedure and surgery. So definitely keep him stashed on your bench, though. When he comes back, I think he'll once again still be the quality player we expect him to be. But Ridley, then, the goal now for Ridley and his owners is to try to be that strong back that we've seen before, and not have the fumbling issues. It's going to be this is now a big come-on man challenge for Stevan Ridley, literally, because again, he just let it get away, and he needs to show that he can be the guy and not get overlooked like this or overpassed by guys like Vereen. Not that Vereen doesn't have talent, he does, but it's put up or shut up time for Ridley and his owners. So for Breen, keep him on the bench till he returns. Same situation though with Danny Amendola. Had a great week. I mean, you're ecstatic about these guys when you draft them because because Amendola going from St. Louis to New England, Tom Brady now as quarterback, he's going to be involved. Battled through that groin issue to go over 100 yards. Didn't find the end zone, but still 10 fantasy points. But we now hear the reports coming out. Amendola has not practiced this week. He didn't practice Monday. He wasn't at the walkthrough day on today. And now there's a report that just came out on NFL.com saying it's an almost certainty that Amendola is going to miss the Thursday night game against the Jets. So not looking good again for the Patriots for this regard either, and for Amendola's owners, again, myself included. Excuse me, I don't know what is going on. But yeah, certainly a concern. So obviously, with almost certain, it sounds like Amendola's not going to play. So obviously, it's the way it sounds like, you're probably going to put Amendola if you have him on your bench as well. Now, there's a guy out available on the wire in my league that if he's available in your league, now that you know that Amendola's not playing, you should definitely get him as well, and that's Julian Edelman. Edelman has completely leapfrogged some of these other guys below who were thought to be above him on the depth chart, like Kenbrell Tompkins, Aaron Dobson. He has completely been outstanding. He had 79 yards and 2 touchdowns against the Bills. So obviously the Patriots are ecstatic about this guy. Tom Brady loves throwing to him. And they're filling in nicely, both guys, through the loss of Wes Welker and Aaron Hernandez. So normally, again, I would have listed Amendola as a must-start against the Jets, but because he's not playing, you want to sit him. Now, Edelman definitely becomes a look as a must-start, and maybe even you give Kenbrell Tompkins a second chance. Because again, now that we know Amendola's not playing, someone's got to get the passes from Tom Brady, and maybe these two guys now are going to be the starting guys. So I definitely would start Edelman. Maybe you look at Tompkins as a number 2, number 3 option now because Amendola is going to be out. I have no idea why I'm coughing up so much crap. I didn't have this before the show started, seriously. Oh my gosh. Okay. And then finally, the last star in that game, E.J. Manuel of Buffalo. We saw some great things from Manuel in the preseason, and he carried it over into this game. Even in defeat, you have to consider his performance real impressive for E.J. Manuel. 18 of 27, $150, and 2 touchdowns. That is nothing at all to sneeze at. Buffalo, I think, has definitely found a very strong quarterback in the future. A lot of people, when he was drafted in the first round, really questioned the pick, but I think certainly Buffalo's found its guy. And I think he could be a solid, real number 2 option for you guys against Carolina next week. Carolina, not exactly stout in defense, so I think he could be a solid number 2 option for you guys. As for the downside, I mentioned a couple of these guys. Stevan Ridley, obviously, 9 carries for 46 yards, but the fumble landed in the doghouse. But now that we know that Breen's not going to play, Ridley against the Jets, I think you definitely should consider starting, and maybe more of those at number 2 to see if that fumble is still going to be an issue or not, but certainly a guy you can plug in your lineups. Buffalo's running back situation, not pretty either. C.J. Spiller had a fumble in that game as well. He had 17 carries for 41 yards, but he was clearly outperformed by Fred Jackson. And what's surprising is, this has gone now from Spiller's job to lose. The quote in the preseason, we're going to give Spiller the ball till he throws up. Well, apparently that didn't happen in the game. So, so now this has gone from Spiller's job to lose to committee written all over it with Fred Jackson. So, and since Carolina just shut down Marshawn Lynch, you might not want to start either of these guys, but if you do, Fred Jackson, I think, is more the recommended option now in Buffalo with Spiller, those fumbling issues, and the fact that he completely got outperformed by the veteran Fred Jackson. And I do have Kenbrell Tompkins on this list, but only because of the fact that there was so much hype surrounding him.
in the first week. He was targeted, though. Get this, though. Tompkins was targeted 14 times in the game, the same exact number as Danny Amendola. He only caught 4 passes for 42 yards. So I don't know if you can chalk that up to jitters or nervousness or whatever, just an off day. But now that we know that Amendola is probably not going to play on Thursday night, I look at Tompkins as a pretty decent number 2, number 3 option against the Jets this week because I think it's going to be him and Edelman, maybe even Zach Sudfeld at tight end that get a majority of the looks from Tom Brady. Moving on to our next game, New Orleans and Atlanta. Boy, when these two get together, it's always an entertaining game. It's always fun to see these two go at it. It wasn't the high-scoring affair that I think a lot of people expected, but I think that just goes to show how improved the defenses are of these two teams. The Saints did come out on top at home, winning 23-17. A lot to break down, and so we'll just look at right away. So the stars from this game. How about Harry Douglas of Atlanta? Roddy White, we later found out, was still dealing with that ankle injury, that high ankle sprain, and it really hindered his ability to catch passes. But Douglas filled in nicely, 4 passes for 93 yards, and he even led the way in receiving. So that was a huge moment for him. Now, White has said that he's going to be okay. The ankle injury isn't that big of a deal. Personally, I think it is because he only had 2 catches for 19. So that's certainly a concern. I think Douglas, though, for the Rams matchup next week, could be a nice number 3 option depending on where you're at. If you're desperate, if you want to take a guy with some upside, maybe you could plug Douglas in your lineup as a number 3 guy against the Rams. Darren Sproles of the Saints, obviously, great guy to have on your team, especially in PPR leagues where he does most of his damage. He doesn't do most of his work on the ground. That's really the bad news with him, but he doesn't catching passes. He caught all 6 passes from Drew Brees for 88 yards. I think he's locked in as a number 2 guy going up against Tampa Bay. And then Steven Jackson of Atlanta totaled 122 yards. Now, even though he failed to find the end zone, he definitely showed his versatility on the ground and caught passes out of the backfield like Mr. Sproles. Obviously, against his former team, Steven Jackson's going to have some incentive. He'll want to take apart his former team, so I think he's an obvious start going up against St. Louis next week. That'll only give him more incentive to do well. On the downside of things, what is it with bad running games? I think we're noticing a pattern here. The Saints running game. What Sproles makes up for in the receiving department, everybody else just cannot get the running game going. The Saints aren't known for their running. Ever since Reggie Bush left, the Saints have not been known for their running game, and it really is showing. You cannot trust guys like Pierre Thomas or Mark Ingram. You just can't trust these guys. Now, Thomas led the way with 9 carries for 43 yards. Sproles had 8 for 22, and Mark Ingram only had 9 carries for a paltry 11 yards. We think at some point, this is going to be the year that Mark Ingram finally breaks out. Well, so far, it didn't look like there's any sign of it happening. The only running back you're worth starting at this point in the Saints is Sproles, and only for that PPR yardage. None of these guys are recommended options right now to start in the league. I mentioned him, but again, Roddy White, 2 catches, 19 yards. That right ankle still bothersome. I think he's a definite question mark going into the St. Louis game. We want to monitor his status throughout the week. If he plays, maybe he's more of a decent number 2, number 3 guy. Again, it all depends on his health and how that ankle responds to him. But we'll see. Just monitor his status throughout the week. If you have him on your team, monitor White's status. And if not, if he doesn't play or he's going to be limited, be prepared to plug another guy into your lineups for Roddy White. And Kenny Stills of New Orleans, I know he had a good week, but don't really buy into the hype just yet. He had 86 yards, but only on 2 catches, and one was a deep ball for 67 yards. So you really don't want to buy into this story just yet. He's one worth maybe putting on your scout team, kind of worth as a look to see if this effort carries over to other games. But I don't want people to kind of fall into that trap saying, 86 yards, da-da-da-da-da. I got to put him as number 3 receiver, da-da-da-da. Don't do that yet, okay? Just calm down. Wait, stop. Just Breaks. Pause button. Pose. Pause button. Just wait and wait for a minute, and don't do that yet. Just wait and see what happens. Put on your scout team. See if that effort carries over to the other games. Jets in Tampa Bay. Holy cow, Geno Smith won his debut. I never would have guessed it. I honestly never would have thought. He's the first star of the game. I mean, what more can you say? I mean, I never thought I'd put Geno Smith in the 3-star section, but it happened. He actually really was fairly impressive. It's clear that he is a way better quarterback than Mark Sanchez. The Jets shouldn't even put Sanchez back in the lineup after he's healed from his shoulder injury, which he might miss more time from because maybe a torn labrum in it. I mean, I hate to say this. I really hate to say this, but Jets fans, the injury to Mark Sanchez might have been a blessing in disguise. What Rex Ryan did in putting him in might be a blessing in disguise. Come on. It's the guy that did the butt fumble. That guy, that play just got retired from the Sports Center, not top 10. It was that bad, okay? Geno Smith is a far better upgrade than Mark Sanchez. He was 24 of 38 for 256 yards, had a score. The turnovers obviously are a concern. He had the interception. He lost a fumble. But really, it wasn't Sanchez bad. It's not Sanchez level bad. Jets fans, we like that. That's a good thing. I think next week, going up against that Pats secondary that isn't exactly stellar, that just got sort of shelled by A.J. Manuel in Buffalo, I look at Geno as maybe a sleeper number 2 option. If you're in a league that starts 2 quarterbacks, maybe you look at Geno Smith as someone who might put up really good numbers. Remember, he plays on Thursday night, so you'll want to get him in your lineup real quick. Maybe put a waiver plug in for him, but certainly a guy you look at going forward. Right now, not a surefire starter just yet, but a number 2 guy you could look at going forward because it's certainly an upgrade over Mark Sanchez. Vincent Jackson, Tampa Bay. Another guy looked really strong. There is no question now who Josh Freeman's number 1 weapon is in Tampa Bay. None. It's Vincent Jackson. 7 catches for 154 yards. Now, he didn't find the end zone this week, but with numbers like that, if he puts something up every single week, if he gives you double-digit points, he didn't have to find the end zone. The end zone could be a Kalahari desert away in Africa, and Vincent Jackson is putting up numbers across the sand. It doesn't matter. You know, he's putting up double-digit fantasy numbers for you. That's great. So I think you can start Jackson with confidence against the Saints. You know their secondary is not that great. He's definitely a must-start option. And how about this name, Kellen Winslow? Remember Kellen Winslow? Yeah, he went to Cleveland and then bombed out, went to Tampa Bay, and then bombed out, didn't do so well. Well, he was Geno Smith's favorite target in New York. He hauled in 7 catches for 79 yards and a touchdown. That's huge. So it's interesting to see if they kind of keep this rapport up for the rest of the season. But if you know, he could be maybe a sleeper tight end for this week's matchup with the Patriots. You maybe want to, again, someone maybe want to put on your scout team, or if you want to carry a second tight end on your roster, maybe Winslow's a guy you look at as a guy to be on your bench for you. Monitor the situation, see how he pans out going forward, and we'll see if this isn't just a 1-week thing. Downside, the hair pullers that let the trend continue. The Jets running backs. They suck, okay? They stink. I think it's clear. Geno Smith is going to be the Jets' offense. It's just plain as the nose on the face. It's just these guys, they're terrible. You know, Smith was the team's leading rusher, okay? He's Cam Newton Jr., okay? That's what Geno Smith is. He's literally a smaller version, not yet hyped yet, of Cam Newton, okay? Bilal Powell, Chris Ivory, the ship has sailed. I thought Chris Ivory would honestly do something special for the Jets because he was going to get the bulk of the work. He was going to, you know, maybe have a breakout performance. It's the Jets. Apparently, it's where running backs go to die. So, the ship has sailed. Don't start Jets running backs. No. Josh Freeman at Tampa Bay. I thought Freeman would absolutely torch and destroy the Jets secondary. Well, so much for that. Come on, man. He only did with 1 receiver, Vincent Jackson, and he went 15 of 31 for 210 yards with the score and the pick.
But Freeman has a very juicy matchup with that Saints secondary next week. Because of this performance, though, I can't label Freeman as nothing more than a number 2 guy. And Mike Williams at Tampa Bay. Yeah, yes, I know. He had 4 catches for 52 yards and a touchdown. But don't kid yourself with Mike Williams. Mike Williams is an extreme fantasy hair puller. Woo, woo, woo. I mean, he's been frustrating week after week with me in the past. He had a great week one week. Next week, Donut City. So, Donut City. So, you'll just make you want to pull your hair. So, the matchup alone leaves Williams nothing more than a number 3 guy. But please, don't fall for the fact that he's an every week starter. He's not. All right. Kansas City at Jacksonville. Not a whole lot to find from this game because this had ugly UGLY written all over it. Well, at least in the Jaguars' end. Kansas City rolled them 28-2. 2. Really, Jacksonville? 2? You're that bad? Your offense can't even score. You have to score on a safety. But that's the thing. Jaguars have no offense. Outside of Maurice Jones-Drew. MJD. I play fantasy too. Yeah. He's your only offense. 28-2. I wonder what the Vegas spread was on that game. I'm sure Kansas City covered it. 2. Unbelievable. Well, the only stars I have on this list in this game are Alex Smith and Jamal Charles. Alex Smith, 21 of 34 for 173 yards and 2 scores. Certainly a performance worthy of praise. But Chiefs don't get the luxury of playing the Jaguars every single week. So just kind of temper your expectations with Alex Smith. Don't praise him as the next big thing just yet. I think he's more of a number 2, number 3 option for you against Dallas this coming week. And Jamal Charles, he's back in charge. Carved up the Jags, 100 total yards and a score. Now, he did leave the game with a quad injury with her, but hopefully it's not too much of a concern. As long as he's healthy, you start Jamal Charles against the Cowboys. On the downside is almost all Jaguars. You should know that. Blaine Gabbert, 16 of 35, 121 yards, 2 interceptions. And that's all I have to say. Not even worth a look against the Raiders. Please, do not start Blaine Gabbert. MJD and Cecil Shorts. Normally, I guess Shorts is a borderline. He's the only Jaguar players you would normally consider starting. They were abysmal, as was, of course, the whole Jaguars' offense, or semblance of it. 15 carries for 45 yards for MJD, 3 catches for 40 yards for Shorts. Yikes. For the Raiders game, I have MJD as more of a number 2, Shorts more of a maybe risky, desperate number 3. And Dwayne Bowe in Kansas City, we wondered what the rapport would be with Alex Smith. He only had 4 catches for 30 yards, but he was targeted 6 times. Because Smith was able to spread that ball around a lot against the Jags, that's why maybe Bowe wasn't targeted as normally as he was. I think he's still worth a look as, again, more of a number 2, number 3 option going up against Dallas next week. Seattle, Carolina, ugly game. Seattle didn't have to score very much, but they didn't have to, thankfully. Seattle did pull out the win, 12-7. Russell Wilson, even though the Seahawks don't score a whole lot of points, Wilson finds ways to score plenty in fantasy. 25 of 33, 320 yards and a touchdown. Not a bad day at all. Now it's going to be a tough matchup for Wilson going up against the Niners next week, but I still like him as a low-end number 1, high-end number 2 option next week. I think it's going to be an offensive shootout, just like San Francisco had this week with Green Bay. I expect the same thing here in this game. Really like Russell Wilson going forward. D'Angelo Williams of Carolina was a nice surprise. No Jonathan Stewart inside. He was out with his injury, and Williams took full advantage of that, pounded out 16 carries for 76 yards. Now, he did lose a fumble, but that was really the only damper on Williams' day. I think he's actually a great start against this Bills defense. Remember, the Bills just got torched by Shane Vereen,
So I think Williams is a great starting option for you. I definitely think you can have him in your lineup going up against the Bills. And Doug Baldwin of Seattle, another nice surprise. I don't think anybody saw this coming. With Percy Harvin being out with that hip injury, Golden Tate and Sidney Rice were supposed to be the guys in Seattle who stepped up for Harvin's absence. But Baldwin was targeted 8 times, and he caught 7 of them for 91 yards. Now, while it was Jermaine Kearse, the under-radar guy, who had the only touchdown, I think Baldwin is definitely worth watching. For the Niners game, I would rank the receivers in this order. I would still think Tate would be the top guy. Then I'd go Baldwin, Rice, and then Kearse. So that's the way I'd rate those guys. We're looking at a Seattle receiver. I still think Tate's a safe bet. Maybe plug in Baldwin as the number 3. Rice and Kearse are not recommended starting options until they get more involved in the offense. But I think Tate and Baldwin definitely guys you can look at as starting this week. Downside, Cam Newton. I didn't expect Newton to do all that much against the Seahawks defense because the Seahawks defense is very stout, very strong. 16 for 23, 125 yards and a score. Not bad, but not great either. We kind of expect bigger numbers from Newton, so I think he'll have better days, and he should definitely do that against the Bills next week. I think you can start Cam Newton as you normally would because it's a great matchup with Buffalo next week. Marshawn Lynch, definitely disappointed his fantasy owners this week, myself included. Had to be screaming at our poor computer screens. Lynch only had 17 carries for 43 yards and didn't find the end zone. You can only hope that Lynch is going to bounce back against that Niners defense this week. But really, really tempering expectations. Maybe more of a number 2 because that Niners run D is very stout. They didn't let the Packers running game do much against them. Mostly it was Aaron Rodgers' passes that killed them. So, again, just kind of really temper expectations with Marshawn Lynch. Tough matchup. And Steve Smith of Carolina. Yes, the touchdown saved his fantasy day, but otherwise only 6 catches for 51 yards. The score is what got him out on a slow start. I expect a better performance, though, against Buffalo. I think you can still trust Smith as a number 2 wideout option. Miami-Cleveland. I did not expect, actually, Miami to look this good. I was thoroughly surprised. I thought Cleveland, their performance in the preseason, would carry over to the regular. So much for that. Miami dominated a 23-10 win. Ryan Tannehill in Miami. Again, I was not expecting him to do that well against a decent but not great Browns secondary, but oh my word. Tannehill proved all those doubters wrong. 24 of 38 for 272 yards with a score and an interception. He's definitely trending in the right direction. He's definitely starting to get more confidence in the offense. Now he's had a year or 2 under his belt. He's definitely starting to get better as time goes on. And that next week, the matchup with the Colts, kind of a shady secondary, not that great. They just got destroyed by Terrell Pryor, almost lost to the Raiders. So I think you can start Tannehill maybe as a number 2 guy with some upside in him. If you start 2 quarterbacks, maybe you look at Tannehill as an option going up against the Colts. So maybe a number 2 guy you can look on. Brian Hartline in Miami. Yeah, Mike who? Where's the ticking clock? Yeah, I don't hear it. Wallace was nowhere to be found. Hartline turned out to be Tannehill's favorite target. 15 targets. 15 of them in the game, the Hartline, with 9 catches for $115 and a score. Now, it will be interesting, though, to see if Hartline can show some consistency. We've seen this story and drama played out multiple times before with Hartline. He has a good week, 2 good weeks. We think, oh yeah, definite waiver wire ad. And then we add him, and what happens? He completely disappears off the fantasy radar. Like, no rad can't even find him. But, for now, since this is a good stepping stone going forward and Tannehill's getting better, maybe you look at him as a number 3 with some upside going up against the Colts if this rapport continues. We'll just wait and see what happens. It's kind of a high risk, high reward, but definitely possibly worth a look as a number 3. And Jordan Cameron of Cleveland. I told you guys about this tight end from Cleveland, Jordan Cameron. Yes, it's so much so that I'm shaking the camera. I told you guys about Jordan Cameron, and apparently the preseason hype for some players is real, my friends. Cameron backed it up and then some. 9 catches for 108 yards and a score. He's no fluke. I think he's definitely a guy you can plug in your lineups as a starting tight end. especially going up against the Ravens, who, by the way, who didn't realize they just got buku destroyed by Peyton Manning and gave up 2 touchdowns to a tight end named Julius Thomas. So, that we didn't even know about. So, definitely, you can start Jordan Cameron this week against the Ravens. As for the downside of guys, Brandon Weeden, I thought that his preseason hype would kind of show here, but for this week anyway, I was wrong. He looked like an old quarterback. He threw 3 interceptions, which really his stat line wasn't that bad. 26 of 53, it's a little less than 50% though, for 289 yards, but those 3 picks really, really hurt his fantasy day. But going up against that suspect Ravens secondary next week, I like Weeden. Maybe he's a number 2 guy, getting some upside, but I think a guy who can potentially look as a number 2 guy for you if you start 2 quarterbacks. Miami's running backs. Oy. You think they're missing Reggie Bush right now? Lamar Miller and Daniel Thomas. Yikes. What we feared has come true. This is clearly a running back by committee. But neither was able to get much done because Tannehill went buku on the pass. Miller, 10 carries for 3 yards. 3! I mean, oh my gosh, that's awful. Thomas had the touchdown. He had 8 carries for 14 yards in the touchdown. He's going to be the goal line back. I still think, though, here's what's funny. I still think Miller's the safer bet. He's still the starter, right? We haven't heard anything that he's not starting. I think he's worth a look, maybe as a number 2, low, maybe high number 3 against the Colts. But after this, you could start to make a case for Daniel Thomas as a flex option because this is a committee running back team, clearly. And Trent Richardson of Cleveland, you know, T-Rich's schedule, not exactly pleasing the first few weeks. But then again, can you really afford to sit him? Probably not. Only had 13 carries on 47 yards because Weeden again had to launch the ball coming from behind. And it doesn't get any easier with that Baltimore run defense next week. Considering that they just eliminated Denver's running attack, what little they had. I think T-Rich is more of a risky number 2. Again, you're probably not going to sit him, but just kind of temporary expectations going up against that Baltimore defense. Detroit and Minnesota. Lions win 34-24. It all starts and ends with Reggie Bush. Was anyone expecting that performance from Reggie? We know how good AP is. We know that. We know Adrian Peterson is a must-start buku every week. We know that. But Bush racked up 90 yards on the ground and 101 receiving with a touchdown. He has definitely cemented himself as an every-week starter, and his owners are going to love the matchup against the Cardinals this week because Cardinals, Darrell Richardson had a good game against them with the running game and the wideout play. Rams beat them. You know, great matchup. Start Reggie Bush with confidence. Nate Burleson in Detroit as well. Ryan Broyles is still recovering from his knee injury, apparently. He was a scratch this week. Big old donut. So, Burleson, I think he's put himself in that number 2 receiver spot behind Megatron. Caught all 6 of his targets for 78 yards. Huge for Burleson. I think he's an intriguing number 3 against the Cardinals, but comes with a little bit of risk because that Cards secondary is really, really strong now with the Honey Badger there and Tyrann Mathieu. You know, so definitely, you know, Patrick Peterson. So a lot of risk there, but a number 3 with some upside. And Jerome Simpson in Minnesota. Well, gee, someone has to catch the ball in Minnesota, right? When Christian Ponder is your quarterback and AP is your offense, someone has to catch the ball, and Simpson was the preferred target this week. Caught 7 passes for 140 yards. You hope it's not a fluke. You really hope that it's not a fluke and that there will be a consistent number 1 threat in Minnesota. But then again, this is Ponder, the quarterback we're talking about, and he really restricts his receivers. I think he's only worth a look as a number 3, number 4 option going up against the Bears next week. Downsides. G. Where do I start? Oh, I know. Let's start with Christian Ponder. Expect him to be in this spot every single week unless he pulls a miracle out of his butt. He's like Tim Tebow, but without all the hype, without all the cameras and paparazzi.
18 of 28 for 236 yards, a score, but 3 interceptions. I. This shirt is made for Christian Ponder. This shirt is made for him. The Christian Ponder Factory is putting out hundreds of these shirts right now. Not worth on being on a fantasy roster. No. No. Don't start him against the Bears. Don't start him against anybody. Don't start him against the CFL. Don't start him against the UFL, Arena League, XFL, whatever, NAFL, NAIA, whatever. No. No. Oh, I think of the Christian Ponder taste out of my mouth. Ugh. Oh. No. Okay, I'm good now. Greg Jennings in Minnesota. It's simple math, folks. It's new math. Downgrade in quarterback equals downgrade in fantasy numbers. Aaron Rodgers to Christian Ponder. You do the math. Only had 3 catches for 33 yards. Even if he's worse starting, nothing more than a number 3, if anything, against the Bears. You know, who's going to get the targets? We don't know. We don't know. It's Christian Ponder. We don't know. And Calvin Johnson. I know, shocking on this list, but didn't have a great week for his owners. You normally expect more out of him. He only had 4 catches for 37 yards, but he was targeted 9 times, so he gets a share of work. Take comfort in that. He'll get his share. Start him as you normally would, even though that tough matchup in the secondary with the Cardinals looms, and they might try to again to double team him. We'll see what happens. But you're not sitting Calvin Johnson. I mean, come on. You drafted him to your number 1 receiver. You're not sitting Calvin Johnson. You're sitting Christian Ponder, or not drafting Christian Ponder, or not picking up Christian Ponder. You're starting Calvin Johnson. Okay, I'm off the Ponder train. Gosh, everyone needs to be off the Ponder train. There's no one on the Ponder train. We'll make these shorts. Colts in Oakland. Let's talk about good teams, or sort of good teams. Well, one good team, one kind of, still trying to figure out team. Colts in Oakland. Colts won in a thriller comeback, 21-17. Andrew Luck, the game-winning 19-yard rushing touchdown. And, yeah, that could have been a good thing, but you got to look at Terrell Pryor and what he was able to do against the Colts, you know? He surprisingly didn't fall on his face like Raiders quarterbacks tend to do, you know? He earned the starting job. 19-29, 217 yards and a touchdown. 112 rushing yards. To think that he outrushed Darren McFadden. Yeah, I know, right? Shocking. But, you know, the 2 interceptions, that hurt, but clearly Pryor has made his presence felt. I think he's definitely someone you can get off the wire. And, hey, who are the Raiders playing next week? No, not Christian Ponder. Get off that train. No, they're playing the Jaguars. They're playing that pathetic Jaguars defense. And that offense only scored 2 points. So you can definitely start Terrell Pryor against the Jaguars. Because they suck. Vic Ballard to the Colts. Ahmad Bradshaw may be the starter on the depth chart. He's first listed, but he did nothing to prove it against Oakland. Ballard got more of the work. He got more yardage. 13 carries for 63 yards. Now, the Colts, we know, have never really been a run-heavy team, but Miami is a decent matchup next week. If Ballard gets the start, I think you look at him as a number 2, number 3 option for you. And then some receivers. Reggie Wayne, of course, and Rod Streeter of Oakland. Both these guys led their teams in receiving, and I really like both guys going forward. Wayne, for obvious reasons. He's still Andrew Luck's favorite target. He had 8 catches for 96 yards and a score. Now, Streeter got more targets and yardage than Denarius Moore. Streeter had 8 targets, Moore had 7. Streeter had 70 yards, Moore had 43. Now, Moore had the touchdown, but I like Streeter more going forward because I think he's more of a playmaker and has not been very frustrating like Moore has been in training camp and preseason this year.
Wayne obviously must start against Miami. Streeter, more of a strong maybe number 2, number 3 option going up against that Jacksonville. If you can even call it a defense. Downsides, Darren McFadden. Hate to put him on this list, but didn't do a whole lot otherwise. He had a touchdown, yes, but Pryor stole a lot of his work. So that's going to be, I think, a concern for McFadden owners going forward. Not only his health, but because of Pryor's running ability, is that going to take away from McFadden's touches? I say yes. But I think McFadden will get a lot of work against Jacksonville because a lot of Oakland playmakers are going to be able to do stuff against Jacksonville. So as long as Terrell Pryor doesn't vulture Darren McFadden in the running department, I think you can start DMC with confidence against the Jags. Ahmad Bradshaw, seriously, he is definitely in danger of losing the starting job already. Ballard did more with, well, more. Bradshaw only had 7 carries for 26 yards. Now, he might be worth a flex maybe against Miami, but nothing more until he can actually prove himself in this Colts offense. And Denarius Moore, I mentioned him. I just don't trust him to be a consistent option. Yeah, he had the touchdown, but there are better weapons out there, and there's, I think, less opportunities for Moore in that offense. He could be maybe worth a look as a number 3, number 4 against the Jags, but honestly, I think that's it for him. I think Streeter's the safer bet. And T.Y. Hilton had a disappointing day. 3 catches for 20 yards. Not what you expected from the so-called kind of breakout candidate expected to really, have a good year this year. However, though, with Miami coming into town now, they weren't exactly stellar against Brandon Weeden, so who knows what can happen. I still think Hilton is a pretty solid, maybe number 2, number 3 option for you. I think you'll find a way to bounce back. So looking at the other matchups, Chicago and Cincinnati. Bears win the opener 24-21. Mark Trestman wins his debut in Chicago, which is good confidence for him. Then we look at the numbers here. On the good side, I like what, especially I like what Andy Dalton did. Even in defeat, he played really well. 26 of 33, 282 yards, had 2 scores. Yes, the 2 interceptions definitely hurts his day on the day, and he tends to be turnover prone. Has to cut down on those turnovers. But next week, going up against Pittsburgh, that's kind of a tough matchup for him. Polamalu is back in the secondary now, but again, with their offense in shambles, who knows what could be expected of him. So maybe Dalton again, maybe a sleeper number 2 you can look at to start there. On the rest of these, I'm just kind of going to go rapid fire. Cutler's Day, 21 of 33, 242. 2 touchdowns, had a pick, so a decent day, not great. Chicago next week is against Minnesota. That's a great matchup for him. I think Cutler could certainly be worth a look again as his number 2 starter for you to start 2 quarterbacks. Not a surefire starting option, but definitely something you could look at as a number 2 starter. The Bengals' running game was not exactly outstanding either, but then Jarvis Green-Ellis surprisingly got more work than Giovanni Bernard. He got 14 carries compared to Bernard's 4. Also, Green-Ellis had the touchdown. With Cincinnati going up against Pittsburgh next week. Again, that's a very tough matchup. They did a good job on Chris Johnson, so I don't recommend starting any Bengals running backs next week, but apparently if you start one guy, maybe as a number 2, number 3, it looks like Green-Ellis is the guy right now because Bernard is not getting his share of looks. As for Chicago running back, Matt Forte's day, 19 carries, 50 yards, and a score. The score pretty much saved his fantasy day. Normally, again, you would expect more from that, but Cincinnati's defense, very strong. So obviously, I kind of expected Forte to have not a great day, but thankfully the touchdown saved him. Next week, going up against Minnesota, they just got carved up by Reggie Bush and Jackie Bell. So I think Forte is a great starting option against the Vikings next week. Receiving wise, you know how good A.J. Green is. You're starting A.J. Green every single week. Nine catches, 162 yards, and 2 scores. A.J. Green's a must-start, guaranteed. The most impressed, I would say, receiver that I've seen from Cincinnati, Tyler Eifert. I think he's definitely a preferred option over Jermaine Gresham. Now, I will say that both tight ends caught all of their targets. They each caught 5 passes, targeted 5 times. But Eifert did have more yardage, 47 to 35, and neither found the end zone. Hopefully that'll change in the coming weeks when Cincinnati gets in the red zone. Again, they're going up against Pittsburgh next week. That's a real tough matchup. If you want to start one of these guys at tight end, I still think I prefer Eifert for the moment. But I don't think either really are a surefire starter until a better matchup comes around. Chicago, Brandon Marshall, Martellus Bennett, they both had scores. I think they're definitely we're starting against the Vikings next week. Alshon Jeffrey, not for sure. I don't think a starter just yet. He's still, he was targeted 8 times in the game, second most targets. That's good, but he only caught 5 of them for 42 yards. So again, not a. I don't think even cracks the number 3 option starter just yet. But again, going up against Minnesota, maybe borderline. If you're desperate for wide receiver, maybe you look at Jeffrey as number 3. But I don't think he's fully there in standard leagues just yet. Moving on now to the late games, the Monday night games. St. Louis, Arizona. Rams win this one 27-24. With both these teams, we know San Francisco and Seattle are top-heavy in the NFC West. So this game is kind of okay. How are these teams going to pan out in the NFC West? So for quarterback wise, I was most impressed by Sam Bradford. 27 to 38, 299 yards, 2 scores, the INT. Even though Palmer outgained him, he was 26 of 40 for 327 with 2 scores and a pick. So both had pretty decent days, although Palmer also lost a fumble. So both had pretty decent days. Going forward for them this week, Arizona is against Detroit. Hard to gauge Detroit's secondary after playing Minnesota, but they did just get burned by Jerome Simpson. So maybe you look at Palmer again as the number 2 guy. With Bradford going up against Atlanta, again, I think a number 2 in the same vein, not a surefire starter because Atlanta's not exactly a cakewalk defense. So, again, these guys right now are both kind of number 2 guys, maybe more bye week filling than anything. Running games, Arizona not that impressive, but Rashard Mendenhall is getting the bulk of the work. 16 carries for 60 yards. Going up against Detroit next week. Detroit just got burned by Adrian Peterson, so I think Mendenhall is a good, safe starting bet as a number 2 running back for you. St. Louis, Daryl Richardson. I like Daryl Richardson. Can I just say that? I love Daryl Richardson. I have him as my number 3 running back, but now that Vereen is out, I'm going to have to start him for next week's matchup against Atlanta. And I think it's definitely worth a look. Definitely as a number 2 or a flex because Richardson is definitely getting the bulk of the work. 20 carries for 63 yards. He also had 5 catches for 33 yards. So he's definitely a dynamic running back. I like Richardson this week as a number 2, number 3 running back. In the receiving game for Arizona, obviously we know how good Larry Fitzgerald is. You're obviously starting Larry Fitzgerald going forward. 8 catches, 80 yards, 2 scores. You're starting Fitz. He's back. He's got a functional quarterback now. So you're definitely starting Larry Fitzgerald. But also impressive debuts from Andre Roberts and Michael Floyd. Roberts had 8 catches for 97 yards. He was targeted 9 times. He caught 8 of them. That's definitely something worth monitoring going forward.
And Floyd was targeted 6 times and caught 4 of them for 82 yards. Maybe you look at these guys as number 3 wide receivers going forward, especially with the Detroit matchup this week. If Carson Palmer really likes these receivers, getting other guys beside Fitzgerald involved, this could be huge for them. So I like these guys as number 3 receivers going forward right now, and maybe good starting sleeper starters for the Detroit matchup this week. For St. Louis, I told you guys about Jared Cook. I was excited about Jared Cook at tight end for St. Louis, and boy, did he make the most of it. 7 catches for 141 yards and 2 touchdowns. Jared Cook is a must-start tight end going forward, especially going up against Atlanta this week. It's going to be a high-scoring game, I think. We can start Jared Cook with confidence. The disappointing guys were Tavon Austin and Chris Givens. We expected big things from these guys. Austin only had 6 catches for 41 yards. Givens only had 2 for 27. We thought Givens was going to be the breakout guy because he had gotten a lot of work over Austin in the preseason. Now at the moment, you know, I still think for now that Givens is the safer bet. But right now, I don't know if you can really trust these guys to be full-time starters for you. Maybe more number 3, number 4 options going forward right now for both Givens and Austin. Then the other late game, San Francisco, Green Bay.
The good thing about having Belichick there for 100 years, there is a good thing, is that you played against him. You know what I mean? Now, that's, you know, we're pretty darn good. You know, but yeah, you'll definitely look at some different things. You know, do they heavy it up? They used to be put the big tackle in there, tight end, bring another tight end. You know, a lot of different things that you can anticipate, but you have to be ready for it with him. And, you know,
I apologize for the
we think we'll be ready.
frequent drinks. I'm not sure why I have so much snot in my throat. Obviously, Colin Kaepernick was outstanding. You know how good he is. 27 to 39, 412 yards, 3 scores. Aaron Rodgers, you know how good he is. 21 of 37, 333, 3 scores. Obviously, these guys are must-starts every single week. Green Bay is up against Washington next week. That's a great matchup, considering Washington just got picked apart by Philly. You're definitely starting Aaron Rodgers. And even though San Francisco is playing Seattle, and it's a tough matchup, Kaepernick can still do damage in a lot of different ways. I think you definitely start him against the Seahawks. Running games, Eddie Lacy did get the bulk of the work for Green Bay. He had a decent day, 14 carries, only 41 yards, but the touchdown did save his fantasy day. Lacy going forward obviously is going to get the bulk of the work. He's clearly the number 1 guy now in Green Bay. Going up against Washington, though, that's usually a tough run defense. Not exactly a great matchup. Washington is more hurt in the past than anything. So I would temper Lacy's expectations a bit, maybe more of a number 2 guy, maybe borderline number 3. That's a tough matchup for Lacy this week. For San Francisco, Frank Gore had a tough go of it, but again, kind of a similar stat line to Lacy. 21 carries, 44 yards, and a touchdown. The touchdown, again, helps his fantasy day. But usually, you're starting Frank Gore every single week, except, though, with Seattle coming, tough defense, although they did just get carved up by D'Angelo Williams. So I don't know what to expect now. But Frank Gore, based on that, if Seattle's run D isn't as good as it used to be, I think you start Frank Gore. I think you look at him as a number 1, number 2 guy based on that result. Receiving, Jordy Nelson. Apparently the knee is no longer an issue. 7 catches, 130 yards and a score. You're starting him. You're definitely starting Randall Cobb. 7 catches, 108 yards and a score. Jermichael Finley, 5 catches, 56 yards and a score. Apparently he's proved my doubt wrong. I thought you just couldn't trust Jermichael Finley at all. Apparently, my mea culpa to Jermichael Finley. You can start Jermichael Finley now. All 3 of those receivers, great weeks, definite starts against Washington. As for San Francisco, how about Anquan Bolden? How about Anquan Bolden? I'm with the Cowboy mentality. How about Anquan Bolden, huh? I mean, my gosh, what a breakout performance he had. 13 catches,
for 208 yards and a score. That's 26 fantasy points in a CBS league, people. Why did Baltimore get rid of this guy again? He's a must-start going forward. You're definitely starting him against Seattle, even though the matchup's tough. I think it's a great, he's clearly the #1 weapon there. Same goes for Vernon Davis. 6 catches, 98 yards, 2 touchdowns. An outstanding performance by Vernon Davis. You're definitely starting him as well. Just huge. Just Kaepernick, what he's able to do with these receivers, buku huge. Moving on to the nightcaps and the Monday Nighters real quick. Dallas and the Giants. This was a great game to watch. But Dallas, your winner, 36-31. I got a fancy alert on my phone. Probably about Amendola. I get fantasy alerts from ManySuperBowlStarters.com, so. So, Dallas, the big key for them was the turnovers, obviously. Quarterback-wise, Eli and Tony Romo both had great days. Eli, 27-42, 450 yards, 4 touchdowns. The 3 interceptions hurt, but he still had 45 fantasy points in a CBS league, so still not a bad day. Giants going up against Denver next week. That's a real tough matchup for Eli. That secondary, even though without Champ Bailey, is definitely a tough go. But again, it's hard. It's kind of tough to sit Eli. So if you don't have a better option, you can still start him. But I just worry a little bit about that matchup. As for Tony Romo, 36-49, 263 yards, 2 touchdowns, a pick, 30 fantasy points in a CBS league. Dallas next week is going up against Kansas City. I mean, I don't know what we make of Kansas City after that game against Jacksonville. Yeah, but that was Jacksonville. This is a whole different animal. I think Romo's definitely a safe start against Kansas City next week. I'm not concerned about that at all. Giants rushing is a mess. If you're a David Wilson owner, you're pulling your hair out today, I'm sure. My opponent had David Wilson, so I lucked out because he had -3 fantasy points with those 2 fumbles. 7 carries for 19 yards. Yikes. He's clearly in the doghouse. It's a mess. With Andre Brown out, it's a mess. Giants running backs, I think, should be avoided at all costs. Denver against the run is still tough, so not recommended. As for Dallas, DeMarco Murray is back. He's healthy. 20 carries for 86 yards. Going up against Kansas City. Kansas City technically not great against the run, although they did shut Maurice Jones-Drew down, so maybe it's a revamped defense. So I like Murray as a #2 option, but based just what I've seen the first game, temper your expectations. Receiving-wise, for the Giants, you're starting Victor Cruz. He had 3 touchdowns. You're starting Hakeem Nicks when he's healthy. Now, Ruben Randall even had a nice game. This is a guy maybe you could target off the waiver wire as another receiving option for you. He had 5 catches for 101 yards. They were really hoping this guy would break out, and he could be a guy. I know he's on waivers in my league. He could be a guy that could do some good things going forward as well. So Ruben Randall, definitely a guy worth watching. And Brandon Myers, the tight end. Didn't think he'd do much. Had a big game. Was targeted 9 times, 7 catches for 66 yards and a score. Brandon Myers certainly going up against Denver. Maybe more of a #2 option next week, but certainly a guy worth watching at tight end as well. For Dallas, surprisingly enough, Miles Austin was the leading receiver. And this guy was the ultimate hair puller last year for me. But 10 catches, 72 yards. Clearly the hamstring issue is behind him. So you can I guess you can rely on Miles Austin again as a #2, #3 receiver for you. Jason Witten, you're starting him at tight end, obviously. 8 catches, 70 yards, and 2 scores. Dez Bryant had a rough go of it, though. Dez Bryant had a rough day. Yes, he was targeted 8 times, but only 4 catches for 22 yards. You hope it's not a continuing trend for Dez. You hope he comes back around. I would definitely still continue to start Dez Bryant as a #2 option against the Kansas City Chiefs.
And then real quick, just some quick thoughts real quick on the other few games with Philly, Washington, Houston, San Diego. I really want to squeeze this in to get to you guys. With Philly, I mean, what we got is what we got from the Chip Kelly offense: fast-paced, high scoring. We got what we got with them. Washington for them, obviously the big return of RG3. Just a preview for them next week. Philly with the running game is going up against San Diego. That's kind of a tough matchup because Houston didn't do much on the ground against San Diego with the running game. They mostly came back by either turnovers or the pass. So tough matchup there. Now passing wise, it's a better matchup. So you can definitely start guys like Michael Vick. Deshaun Jackson. So these guys did really, really well. So I definitely think you can start Vic next week. This thing is so sensitive. Okay. Vic was 15 to 25 for 230 yards with 2 scores. Had lost a fumble, so not terrible, but I think he'll get better as the season goes on. I think you can start him against San Diego next week. San Diego, obviously, the morale sucked out after that loss to Houston. So Philly's going to be ready to come out with them strong. RG3 had a great day as well. 30 to 49, 329, 2 scores. Yes, he did have the 2 picks, so that hurts, but definitely not sitting RG3. Washington's going up against Green Bay next week. You know it's going to be an offensive shootout, so I like RG3 next week as well. Well, Sean McCoy was outstanding. 31 carries, 184 yards and a score. You're definitely starting with Sean McCoy. Alfred Morris, the touchdown pretty much saved his fantasy day. 12 carries, 45 yards to score. Lost a fumble. Washington is going up against Green Bay next week. Green Bay, of course, their running game, their run defense. Can't stop Kaepernick, can't stop mobile players. And RG3 is definitely mobile, and so is Alfred Morris. So I would definitely think that Morris is worth a start as well next week. Receiving-wise, for Philly, Deshaun Jackson, you're starting him. 7 catches, 140 yards and a score. Brent Selleck, I think he's definitely worth a start as well. He had 2 catches, 56 yards and a score. Not a whole lot of looks, but when he gets in the red zone, he looks for Brent Selleck. So those are the 2 guys I'm looking for there. For Washington, Leonard Hankerson is a guy you could probably look for on the waiver wire now, and maybe you look for as a number 3 option because he had 5 catches for 80 yards and 2 touchdowns. So maybe that's a guy you look for on the wire. Pierre Garçon had a good day, 7 catches, 64 yards. Like him as a number 2, number 3 guy. Everyone else I'm not too fond of, including Santana Moss. He was targeted 9 times, but only had 5 catches for 54. He's nothing more than a desperate number 3, number 4. Okay, let me read you guys the alert on Amendola that I just got here real quick for all you Amendola owners here real quick. It's being reported that Danny Amendola is going to miss Thursday night's game because of the groin injury he aggravated Sunday. He hasn't been officially ruled out yet, but with it being a short week, we're doubtful of plays. One way or another, we'll know for sure about an hour before kickoff Thursday night when the players' inactive list is announced. For now, we encourage you to either keep him benched if you have other quality wide receiver options, or at least have a backup plan ready to insert into the starting lineup in case Amendola doesn't play. So, there you go. That's the latest news on Danny Amendola. That's not important. Okay. And then finally, one more game to dissect here. That was the late game last night, and boy, what a game that was between Houston and San Diego. I thought San Diego had this game in the bag. They were up 28-7. I thought it was over, but in the end, it wasn't over, and Houston came back, won the game at the buzzer with the field goal.
winning 31-28. Numbers to look at. For Houston, Matt Schaub was outstanding. 34-45, 346 yards, 3 touchdowns. Had an interception, but a real good day for Schaub. He has a great matchup against Tennessee next week. Start Matt Schaub with confidence. Phillip Rivers Day, on the other hand, the numbers don't look great, but the touchdowns saved his day. 14-29, 195 yards, but he had 4 touchdowns. Yeah, he threw the pick, but not a bad day by any stretch for Phillip Rivers. Going up against Philly next week, more of a number 2, I think. Not a surefire starter just yet. Rushing-wise, again, in Houston, it's a committee. Foster and Tate usually need to share the work. Foster had 18 carries for 57 yards. Tate had 9 carries for 55 yards. With Houston going up against Tennessee next week, I think both are solid number 2 options for you. I really do. I think Foster is a must start. Tate is definitely worth a look as a number 2 or a flex. San Diego, not pretty. This team clearly does not trust Ryan Matthews. They shouldn't. 13 carries for 33 yards. What a dud. Much better. 5 carries for 27. I don't trust the Chargers running game. And going up against Philly, yeah, it's a good matchup, but at the same time, you know, what do you expect? I only can see these guys as number 2, number 3. And surprisingly, Danny Woodhead didn't get a carry all night. Now, he did get a couple receptions, but didn't get a carry. I'd like to see Woodhead used more in the running game. Receiving, you're starting Andre Johnson. 12 catches, 146 yards. You're starting Owen Daniels. 5 catches, 67 yards, 2 touchdowns. DeAndre Hopkins can be worth a look as a start. He's back from that concussion. He had 5 catches for 66 yards. I really like this kid, DeAndre Hopkins, going forward. Going up against Tennessee, I think he could be a number 3, maybe even a low-end number 2 starter for you this week. If he keeps getting targets, he could be worth a good look against Tennessee this week. For San Antonio, Antonio Gates only had 2 catches for 49 yards, but he led the way in receiving in terms of yardage. Malcolm Floyd only had 1 catch, but was alone for 47. He's not trustworthy yet. Eddie Royal had 3 catches for 24 yards and 2 scores, but not enough targets, I don't think, to be trusted yet. Vincent Brown had a score. That only saved his fantasy day. With San Diego going up against Philly next week, that's kind of a tougher matchup. I would say you're definitely starting Gates. You maybe look at Vincent Brown as a number 3. Maybe Royal as a sleeper 3-4. But other than that, I'm not fond of Floyd yet. Not sold on him just yet. All right, guys. That's it. That is it. That closes the book on week number 1 of the regular season. Again, I hope your teams did well and were very successful. Go ahead and remember, you can always feel free to leave comments on the channel or on the video below. Like the video if you like it. Share your thoughts on how your week went. Any dilemmas for week 2, let me know them, share them. Feel free. I'll try as hard as I can. My schedule's always changing, but I'll try as hard as I can to answer as many questions or comments as I can. Thank you guys. God bless, and we'll see you next week on the Fantasy Football Stock Report.